The very next morning, her sister called me screaming at the top of her lungs, "You can't do this to her. Well, sue you into the ground." Sup Reddit. Beauty. My wife dumped me for her ex-lover during our 10th anniversary dinner, followed by a casual announcement that she was legally entitled to half of my entire life. You should have asked me what those 40 pages were before she signed them back in 2018. Grab your popcorn, folks, because this is about to get ugly. Fanged. My name's Garrett M43, and the foundation for this disaster was actually laid 17 years ago in a soul-crushing office cubicle. Funny. How the worst job you ever have can end up saving you a few $100,000 and your entire financial future. But am getting ahead of myself. Back in 2008, I was a fresh-faced appraiser for industrial equipment working in a cramped, claustrophobic office in downtown Chicago. Bored. The 23rd floor had windows that wouldn't open and buzzing fluorescent lights that gave me a headache every single day. My cubicle neighbor was Adam, a guy in his mid-30s who had already been divorced twice. Adam was a forensic accountant who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. He handled the cases where a guy would build a seven-figure empire from nothing only to lose half of it, because he kept everything in joint accounts. Every single case followed the same tragic pattern. A successful guy, a trusting guy. He thinks that separating assets is unromantic. Then the marriage ends and suddenly romance doesn't matter anymore. Only the legal structure does. Most of them think being a good husband means trusting completely me once they don't realize there's a difference between trust and preparation until it's far too late. Fingen. By then, they're signing away the businesses they built with their own bare hands. I listened. I took detailed notes. I was 26 and single at the time, and marriage seemed like something that only happened to other people. My brother Brandon got completely destroyed. Brandon was 12 years older than me, had his life together long before I did, and had grown a contracting business from a single beat-up truck into a 15-person operation. He had bought 3 rental properties over a decade and was in the middle of renovating a beautiful craftsman house for him and his wife, Rebecca. Rebecca was a middle school teacher. They had 15 years of marriage behind them and 2 kids away in college. Everything seemed solid right up until the moment it wasn't. She left him for her Pilates instructor. Came when Brandon discovered she had been bringing the guy to the house he was currently renovating as an anniversary surprise for her. His security cameras caught every single detail. He took the footage to his lawyer, thinking it would matter in court. It didn't. Illinois is a no-fault state. The judge split everything 50-50, half the business, half the rentals, half the retirement accounts. Finished house had to be sold, and the proceeds were split down the middle. Brandon called me the day the settlement was finalized. His voice sounded completely dead. Don't ever assume fairness, Garrett. System rewards documentation, and it rewards preparation. I trusted completely, and I documented nothing, and I paid for it with half of my life's work. I drove to his place that night. He was living in a cheap rental apartment sitting at a small folding card table. Rebecca had taken almost all the furniture. She had already moved her new guy into the house. Brandon had painstakingly built. Fids hadn't spoken to her since the news broke, but legally, there was nothing anyone could do. I'm the idiot who didn't protect myself, he whispered. That image stuck in my brain like a permanent stain. That night, Adam and I made a solemn pact over some greasy Chinese takeout. We called it the Never Again Protocol. We agreed that if either of us ever got married, we would help the other build real, unbreakable financial protection. Not just shaky prenups that judges love to throw out. Real, layered, documented protection. Everything structured like a corporate merger. 5 years later, I met Valerie at a friend's barbecue in Wicker Park. She was a gorgeous brunette with piercing green eyes, and she had this laugh that made everyone in the yard turn around to look at her. We talked for 4 hours straight. You was a graphic designer. Funny and creative, and she was exactly my type. 6 months later, we were living together. A year after that, I proposed. I fell for her hard.
Fuseball.
I mean, the kind of love where you picture a whole life together growing old on a porch somewhere. But every time I thought about our wedding, I would see the image of Brandon sitting at that empty card table.
Thingy.
So while I was falling in love, I was also busy building that armor. Adam helped me design it like a complex corporate tax strategy. Limited liability entities, clear timestamp documentation.
Fact.
Bank accounts structured specifically to show the difference between access and actual ownership. The wedding was beautiful. Valerie's parents flew in from Minnesota. My parents cried during the vows.
Fington.
And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that fireproof safe hidden away where all the protection documents sat. Those documents were just paperwork, I told myself.
Smoke detectors.
You hope you never actually need them, but you're a fool if you don't install them. Then some red flags started showing up about 2 years into our marriage.
Thing major. At first, just small nagging things.
Her phone was always lying face down on the table. New complex passwords I didn't know.
Fuse.
Late work meetings that never seemed to involve any actual work whenever I asked about them. I noticed everything, but I didn't say a word. I just watched and I waited.
It wasn't.
Much that I worried about. But I knew I wanted to keep myself protected, regardless of what was happening. That's when I quietly activated Phase 2 of the Never Again protocol.
Phone called.
Adam explains the situation, and we spent an entire weekend restructuring everything. I created the postnup. I framed it as liability protection for our future.
View that re.
I told Valerie I was worried about potential lawsuits from clients after a colleague of mine got dragged into court. I told her I wanted to shield our family assets from the risk of my business. She signed every single page while she was watching some mindless reality show on the couch. Do we really need all this? She had asked, barely yelling up from the screen. I told her it was standard asset protection.
Friend.
I said it protects both of us if anything ever happens with my work. She signed without reading a single paragraph. She even joked about it to her friends, later calling it my paranoid paperwork phase. That was in 2018. For the next 7 years, I kept every single penny documented. Valerie had full access to use our daily money, but the actual ownership remained strictly separate.
Yes.
Once asked why she never questioned where the money came from, and she never wondered where it went. She just kept swiping the debit card, living her life. Fast forward to our 10th anniversary this past spring.
They made
reservations at that same place in River North, where Wed had our third date. We sat at the exact same corner table.
Beacon and she.
I had bought Valerie the blue dress she was wearing, specifically for this dinner, wanting to recreate the magic. I thought maybe this is a turning point. Maybe we could finally reconnect.
These had been even more distant lately.
And I wanted one last chance to save us. She didn't look at me once until the course arrived. Then she put her fork down, took a deep breath, and looked me right in the eyes.
Fine.
Leaving you, Garrett, she said, her voice completely flat. I'm going back to my ex, and don't even try to stop me, because I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm entitled to half of everything, and I'm taking it.
There for a second, feeling the silence of the room.
And then I smiled. You really should have read those documents you signed back in 2018. Valerie, I said calmly. Her face went pale. What are you talking about?
Fangzen.
The postnup, I replied, sipping my wine. The one you thought was just my paranoid paperwork phase. It turns out that paperwork covers everything, including the equity in the house, the business, and the investments.
Access to the joint account, Valerie.
But you have no claim to the assets. She turned red, then white, then a sickly shade of gray. You trapped me? She hissed. No, I said, putting my napkin on the table.
Did myself.
I stood up, left the bill on the table, and walked out into the cool Chicago air. The next day, her sister called threatening me with lawsuits, but they both know the truth.
Bing.
They spent a week running to different lawyers, only to find out that everything I did was airtight. The half of everything she was so excited to take. It didn't exist in her world.
He left with her clothes, her personal car,
and her Predwitch was now shattered. I didn't lose a single cent of my future. I didn't lose my business. And most importantly, I kept my peace of mind. People tell me I'm cold.
View that.
They tell me marriage should be about blind faith. But I look at Brandon, and I look at the legal bills that could have ruined me. And I know I did the right thing. Trust is a beautiful thing. But preparation.
You owe.
Preparation is the only thing that saves you when the person you trusted turns out to be a stranger. Never assume fairness. Document everything. And never ever underestimate the power of a signed contract.
Inban.
The blue dress I bought Valerie specifically for tonight was meant to be a bridge, a way to pull us back from the edge of the silence that had been growing between us for months.
Thinked.
We sat at the corner table of the restaurant, the same one where we had our first anniversary, yet the air between us felt thin and cold. I tried to keep the conversation light,
Being asking about our daughter Ruby's finals.
and whether it was finally time to fix the deck, but Valerie barely touched her food.
Dot.
She set down her fork with a clinical precision that made my skin crawl.
Beacon.
Garrett, I need to tell you something important, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth I had spent a decade trying to nurture. My heart hammered against my ribs, fearing a medical emergency or a tragedy involving our child.
View.
Going back to Troy, my ex from college, she continued, her tone as casual as if she were choosing a dessert. I don't think we should continue this marriage. The surrounding tables fell into a sudden,
Fifling silence.
and I watched our waiter freeze halfway to our table. You're a good husband, Garrett. Truly, she sighed, glancing at her nails. But I become bored with this life, and frankly,
Fusing.
Troy was always my true love. I settled for you because he wasn't available back then. The words felt like physical blows, dismantling 10 years of shared history into rubble in less than 3 minutes.
Really loved you.
She added, her eyes cold. You were just the safe, stable choice. I felt a flash of white-hot rage, but then
Fishing.
I remembered the long nights of preparation with Adam, the careful mapping of every worst-case scenario. Then you should leave tonight, I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself.
Feud.
Her expression shifted from smug expectation to genuine confusion. She had wanted a scene, a pathetic display of begging a dramatic anchor for her new narrative.
Pack your bags.
I commanded, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a fight. Sleep in the guest room. And I want you gone before I wake up tomorrow. You're not even going to fight for us.
She hissed.
Clearly losing her composure.
You just told me.
There was never an us, Valerie, I replied, standing up and dropping exactly $180 on the table before walking out.
Thin.
I drove home in a silence, so thick it felt heavy, my mind already executing the never again protocol Adam, and I had perfected over late-night coffee sessions. Once home, I headed straight to the guest room, secured the digital access points, and began the final phase of the plan. An hour later, I heard the front door open, followed by the frantic sound of her packing and a series of dramatic,
Self-pitying phone calls to her friends.
I remained in the guest room, calmly making my own calls to Nathan, my lawyer, and the bank, ensuring every safeguard was locked tight.
Fenced.
Around midnight, she dragged her suitcases down the stairs, pausing in the hallway as if waiting for me to emerge and beg her to stay. I didn't move a muscle.
Right?
I guess I'll finally get half of everything, she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. Hope you saved up, Garrett.
Picked.
As her car pulled away into the night, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Knowing the storm had finally broken, I called Adam. Immediately, the relief evident in my voice, it's done, she's gone.
He actually pulled the Troy card at the anniversary dinner.
Adam laughed, the sound hollow, but triumphant. She has no idea how you've structured this, does she?
Ishil.
The post-nuptial agreement we had drafted was a masterpiece of legal engineering, built like a corporate merger to withstand any emotional assault.
Few.
The key clause ensured that everything earned after the signing remained separate property. And my salary flowed into a business entity she couldn't touch.
Few.
The house was in my name, only the BMW was leased through the business. And the joint checking account held little more than pocket change.
Fix morning.
The expected firestorm arrived in the form of a voicemail from her sister Angela. Garrett, Valerie deserves half of everything.
Use.
Angela snarled, her voice Sharp with predatory intent, prepare for the consequences. I forwarded the message to Nathan and waited, knowing Angela's history of ruthlessly stripping her own ex-husband bare in their divorce.
Finksy.
An hour later, another message arrived. I am officially representing Valerie. Any attempt to hide marital assets will have severe legal repercussions. I tapped out a quick text.
Fing.
You might want to review the postnuptial agreement before you start making threats. There was a long pause, marked by those rhythmic, taunting 3 dots before she finally replied. What postnuptial agreement?
Best.
The one your sister signed in 2018, filed with the county clerk and notarized. I replied. The silence that followed was total, as the realization of her sister's incompetence began to dawn on her.
Busey.
By Wednesday, Valerie and Angela were at the bank demanding access to assets that no longer existed under their control. Michael. The branch manager sat them down in his office, his face a mask of professional indifference.
Thick file of documents laying them out like a series of landmines.
Mrs. Crawford. Michael said, sliding the 2019 restructuring forms across the desk.
These are your signatures notarized and witnessed by our staff.
Valerie stared at the papers, her face draining of all color, as the weight of her own past complacency crushed her.
Bean.
I don't remember signing these. She stammered, her voice shaking. The notes from that day indicate you declined a detailed explanation because you trusted your husband to handle the finances. Michael replied coldly.
Fend.
Angela leaned forward, her eyes darting between the documents, desperately looking for a loophole that simply wasn't there. This is financial abuse! Angela cried, but Michael merely pulled out one final document.
Here,
Michael said, pointing to a customer satisfaction survey she had filled out later that year. Is where you praised the clarity of our services. The trap had been set years ago, and she had walked right into it.
Fang you.
Blinded by her own greed and the assumption that I was the one who was lost. I walked into the bank, then my suit crisp, my composure absolute. I looked at Valerie, who looked smaller, older, and finally truly defeated.
Fact.
Everything has a consequence. Valerie, I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the small office. You wanted a fresh start, consider this it.
Even.
I didn't gloat, I didn't yell. I simply turned and walked out, leaving the ghosts of our marriage behind in that bank vault. Justice wasn't in the money, it was in the total, unavoidable reality of her own choices, finally catching up to her. For the first time in 10 years, the future didn't look like a compromise, it looked like freedom. This is a story about the weight of a signature, the cold reality of betrayal, and the moment when trust turns into a prison. The silence in the courtroom was absolute.
Kind of silence
that feels heavy like the air before a thunderstorm in Chicago. My name is Garrett, and for 10 years I believed I was building a life with a partner. I was wrong.
Fixins.
I was building a legacy while she was simply waiting for the right moment to dismantle it.
Michael?
My attorney didn't flinch when Angela Valerie's shark of a lawyer slammed a stack of papers onto the table. Angela was good.
She was loud.
She was aggressive. And she knew how to play the victim card until the judge almost believed it. My client was manipulated. Angela declared, her voice dripping with practiced indignation.
She was coerced into signing away rights,
while she was essentially a prisoner in her own home.
Oh.
Michael leaned back. He didn't look nervous. He looked bored. He pulled a single crisp document from his briefcase.
Your Honor, Michael said.
His voice calm and steady. 3 months after the agreement was signed, Mrs. Crawford filled out a customer satisfaction survey at our bank. He slid the paper toward the judge.
The handwriting.
Look at the smiley face drawn next to her signature. The courtroom went cold. Valerie's face turned a shade of gray I'd never seen before.
Didn't know,
she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. I was his wife. These accounts were ours. Michael's response was a sharp clinical blade.
Thing.
The accounts were individually owned by Mr. Crawford. You were merely an authorized user. That is a privilege, Valerie. It is not an ownership stake. The realization hit her then, the truth that she had spent a decade ignoring, because it was easier to live in a comfortable lie. The first twist came when the judge asked about the emergency petition.
filed a 32-page document painting me as a financial predator.
She claimed I had isolated Valerie, coerced her, and then spitefully cut her off the moment she decided to leave.
It was masterpiece of fiction. Fee.
Nathan, my second attorney, stepped up. Your Honor, we have the records. He pulled out the credit card statements.
Mr. Crawford,
Didn't retaliate. He protected his assets. His wife maxed out the joint credit line. 9,500 in 48 hours and explicitly threatened to take half of everything, including business capital that wasn't even marital property.
Fent.
The judge's expression shifted. The narrative of the helpless abused wife was starting to look like the narrative of a disgruntled spouse caught in a scheme. The second twist arrived via a muffled recording.
It was a voicemail I had saved months ago.
I stood up and handed the device to the bailiff. The courtroom listened as Troy the man, Valerie, had been seeing lobbed in the background of a phone call.
Finged.
Don't worry about the money, Val, he had said. Once we get that judge to sign the emergency order, we'll drain the accounts before Garrett even knows what happened. The air left the room.
Few but few.
Valerie's mask didn't just crack, it shattered. She looked toward the back of the courtroom, perhaps hoping for a miracle, but there was nothing there.
Fusey.
Only the cold, hard reality of a life she had gambled away for a momentary thrill. The final twist was the most satisfying of all.
Thanks she.
Angela tried to pivot, claiming that the lack of independent counsel for Valerie made the contracts void. She argued that Valerie was too naive to understand the legal jargon of the postnuptial agreement.
Find.
Michael simply turned to the witness stand. Mrs. Crawford, did you read the document provided by your own university thesis advisor, who also happens to be a corporate lawyer before you signed it? Valerie went silent.
Fiki.
I hadn't told anyone that I knew she had consulted someone else. I had kept that receipt.
Fick you.
I had kept the email thread where she bragged to a friend about how she knew what she was doing and was just playing the long game with me. The naive card was off the table.
Being a victim of my structure.
She was an architect of her own downfall. Judge Morrison looked over her glasses, her gaze lingering on Valerie.
You said?
This is not a courtroom for those who view marriage as a business merger gone wrong only to cry by abuse when the dividends stop paying out. The judge denied every single request in the emergency petition. No support.
Sus. No assets.
As we walked out of the courtroom, Valerie tried to approach me. Garrett, we can fix this. We can talk about this. I didn't even stop walking.
Feud.
I didn't owe her an explanation, and I certainly didn't owe her another minute of my time. Never Again protocol wasn't. Just a document I had drafted. It was the life I was now living.
Didn't just feel like a win.
It felt like a final absolute silence. For the first time in 10 years, I finally knew exactly who was standing next to me. And for the first time, I was completely blissfully alone. This is a dramatic storytelling style script designed for a YouTube narration. It follows your structure, keeps the required vocabulary, and maintains the emotional tension of a legal battle.
Fist.
They say marriage is a partnership, but I never realized it was a battlefield until I walked out of that courtroom and felt the floor literally crumble beneath my feet.
Garrett Crawford.
That was my name, and as of that Thursday afternoon in Illinois, it was a name that felt like a liability.
Fused.
The judge had just closed the file, a sound that felt more like a gavel, slamming down on my future than a mere administrative procedure. I stood there paralyzed while the silence in the room stretched out suffocating and cold.
Mr. Crawford.
The judge had said, her voice devoid of warmth, you will vacate the premises by Sunday evening at 8 p.m. I felt my stomach drop.
Fupy.
I had been prepared for a fight, but not for the way Angela Valerie's, shark of an attorney, smirked as she gathered her folders. As we walked out into the hallway, she leaned in her voice a poisonous whisper.
This is just
the beginning. Garrett, hope you've got a comfortable hotel. Maybe next time you'll think twice before manipulating someone into signing their rights away. My attorney, Nathan, grabbed my arm before I could lash out.
Here.
He said, his eyes scanning the hallway. Let's go. Inside the elevator, the silence was heavy.
Ease.
We took a hit. Nathan admitted quietly as we descended, but it's only the first round. We need to find their weakness before the next hearing. I spent the next month in a Hampton Inn near the office. It felt like a prison.
Figs.
Every day was a blur of spreadsheets, bank statements, and the relentless ticking of the clock. Adam, my lead strategist, sat across from me, his face pale under the fluorescent lights.
Fendon Council issue is real, Garrett, Nathan said one Tuesday morning.
Post-nuptial agreements without separate lawyers for both parties. They get scrutinized, Angela knows that. I thought back to 2018.
Bang that dang.
I had explained it as asset protection paperwork. I told Valerie she should read it or have someone look at it. But I had been there explaining it to her myself. I didn't insist. She hire a lawyer.
Friend, I was there when she signed.
That was the nail in my coffin, and Angela was hammering it home with a sledgehammer. You're an industrial equipment appraiser, Adam noted, pointing to a document.
You know.
She's a designer that creates a presumption of constructive fraud. In some states, it's a bad look. Adam was deep in the bank records when he suddenly stopped scrolling. Garrett, what account paid the mortgage every month?
Pulse checking, I replied.
AutoPay. Show me the routing number. AutoUp. I pulled it up. Every month since 2018, the mortgage came from account 4738, not the joint household checking, both our names.
Funded by my business, but technically joint property.
Adam and Nathan exchanged a look that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. That's Cummingling. Nathan whispered classic Cummingling. What does that mean?
Full asked,
my voice cracking. Nathan pulled up the Illinois statutes on his screen. When separate property is paid down using marital funds.
Vote.
The non-owning spouse acquires an equitable interest proportional to the contribution. But it was my money funding that account, I argued. It doesn't matter. Legally, Nathan cut in.
Deal.
Once your distributions hit that joint account, they became marital property. You used jointly owned funds to pay a separate property debt. That's textbook Cummingling. Angela was going to argue that Valerie had a massive claim to the house equity. How bad, I asked, bracing for the worst. Let's do the math, Nathan said. The house was worth $385,000.
Built about $110,000 in equity since 2018.
If a judge finds Cummingling, Valerie could get 20 to 40. That's 22,000 to 44,000. I felt the walls closing in. We kept digging, looking for a way out.
We found the joint credit card.
Shut down the day after Valerie left, but not before Shed maxed it out. 9,500. Both names on it, both liable. Then there was the timing of the account closure.
Day after she left.
Nathan shook his head. If this was a proper financial move, why wait until after the separation? It looks retaliatory. By Thursday, we had found so many holes that I was physically ill. The post-nup was solid in theory, but the execution was a disaster. Family law judges don't like seeing one spouse get cut off, while the other maintains control. The temporary support hearing was brutal.
Phones empty.
Angela arrived armed with a list of Valerie's expenses. Groceries, gas, phone bills, insurance, everything. She argued that Valerie had been accustomed to a high-end lifestyle, and I had maliciously cut her off.
Yeah.
Proclaimed, Mr. Crawford has isolated my client. Financially, she has no access, no credit, no ability to support herself. The judge awarded temporary support, $1,350 a month.
$4,200, Angela
demanded. But it was still $1,350 while the process dragged on. Then the discovery phase hit. Every bank statement, every business record, every transaction for 7 years. They were hunting for more Cummingling, and they found it. The 2020 kitchen renovation, $22,000 Zato from joint checking. The 2021 deck replacement, the 2022 bathroom remodel, all paid from joint funds.
All improvements to my separate property.
Angela amended her petition, claiming Valerie deserved reimbursement for every cent. Nathan did the math again. If a judge bought this, Valerie could get $32,000 to $58,000 in reimbursement, plus the equity percentage, plus attorney fees, if they found bad faith. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had planned everything. But I had made the ultimate mistake. I had been sloppy with the lines between mine and ours, while Angela was dismantling my finances. I started looking at the other side of the equation.
Troy. B. Been doing my own reconnaissance.
Troy's social media, his gym check-ins, his whole curated life at Equinox. He was a wellness coach, a personal trainer who specialized in overcharging divorced women.
Femmed.
Adam's background check was illuminating. 2 previous relationships with married clients. Both ended when the divorces got messy. And then I found the icing on the cake. Troy was seeing other women.
Thiessen.
I didn't tell Angela. I didn't tell Valerie. I waited until the next status hearing. The courtroom was tense. Angela was gloating, holding a printed document that she claimed proved my financial abuse.
For your honor.
Angela said, standing tall, we have documented proof of Mr. Crawford's attempt to hide assets and his failure to uphold the marital standard. Nathan stood up slowly.
Your honor.
If we are discussing marital standards and the integrity of this process, Stas, perhaps we should talk about the third-party interest that has been influencing the respondents' financial decisions.
Then.
I handed Nathan the file, photos, screenshots of messages, Troy's gym logs showing he was at the Hampton Inn with Valerie, while she was claiming she had no place to go. The room went silent.
Angela turned to look at Valerie, who suddenly looked very, very small.
Your Honor! Nathan continued his voice, calm and cold. My client is being asked to pay for his wife's essential expenses, groceries, gas.
Feud and temporary housing yet.
We have documentation that the respondent has been living with her paramour, who is currently charging her for wellness consulting using the very funds she claimed were for her survival.
The judge looked over her glasses.
Miss Chen, is this true? Angela opened her mouth, but nothing came out.
Think.
And Nathan added, we have evidence of the Never Again Protocol, a series of texts where the paramour coaches the respondent on how to maximize the settlement to fund his own business. The judge slammed her gavel.
Easels.
Not to end the hearing, but to demand silence. This court does not appreciate being lied to, she said, her voice like steel. The final ruling wasn't a win, but it was a correction of justice.
Eat.
The temporary support was slashed to 0. The reimbursement claims were thrown out due to the clear evidence of bad faith. And the best part, the judge ordered a full forensic audit of Valerie's spending. As I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't look at Angela. I didn't look at Valerie. I walked past them, my head held high toward a future that was finally mine again. I had lost money, yes,
Patient.
but I had kept my integrity and I had exposed the truth. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that save your life.
You did.
This is a story about the fragility of truth, the sharp edge of betrayal, and the moment the scales finally tipped in my favor. Everything began when the silence in my home became deafening.
Eat.
And for 10 years, I thought I was building a fortress of family finance and future with Valerie. But the blueprint was flawed from the start.
Villain of this story.
Isn't just a man named Troy, a narcissistic personal trainer with a habit of preying on vulnerable married women.
Thinking.
The true architect of my ruin was Angela, Valerie's sister, a woman who treated my marriage like a game of chess played with pieces. She didn't own. The conflict hit its peak when I discovered the affair.
They just a lapse in judgment.
It was a cold, calculated dismantling of my life. Troy was the tool, and Angela was the engineer. I remember the day Troy's world started to crumble.
Nathan.
My lawyer sent over a preservation letter of formal notice that Troy was now a third-party witness in our divorce. The document was clear. His timeline, his finances, and his illicit texts with Valerie were all subject to discovery. I can still hear the panic in his voice when he called Valerie. Not losing my career over your divorce. Valerie, he stammered.
Vind.
His bravado replaced by the whimpering of a man who realized his actions had real-world consequences. He tried to distance himself, blocking her numbers and scrubbing her existence from his social media.
Using.
But the digital footprint was already cast in stone. He was a coward who loved the thrill of the chase, but lacked the courage to face the aftermath.
Valerie.
Blinded by Angela's manipulative promises of a huge settlement and a fresh start, found herself in a basement apartment, clutching the remnants of a life she had voluntarily burned to the ground.
First major pivot happened when my daughter Ruby called me.
She is sharp a finance major at Northwestern, and she was the missing piece of this puzzle.
Thad, Mom is telling me.
You destroyed everything, she said, her voice trembling. I told her to open the file I had prepared years ago, the family financial structure folder.
Please.
I heard the rapid clicking of her mouse, the sound of years of deceit finally being laid bare. She didn't just read the documents, she went to work like the investigator I had raised her to be.
Beeskin.
The second twist came when Ruby realized the depth of the betrayal. She traced the money, the Venmo logs, and the cold-blooded text messages between Valerie and Angela. There it was in black and white.
B-note.
Practice your crying in the mirror, Angela had coached. Don't do anything until after the anniversary, Valerie had replied. Everything had been planned down to the penny and the date.
Ease you.
Ruby didn't just find the truth, she weaponized it. She cut ties with her mother that night, blocking her access and ensuring the evidence was safely in my hands.
You.
The final act moved to the courtroom, a battleground of depositions and discovery. Angela still believing she was the smartest person in the room,
Filed an emergency motion.
accusing me of perjury and hiding business accounts. It was a classic overreach.
Fen.
The account she claimed I had concealed was listed clearly on page 7 of the initial disclosures I had filed months prior.
Danger.
When Nathan presented the highlighted document to Judge Morrison, the air in the room grew heavy with the smell of defeat.
Peace.
My lawyer didn't just refute the motion, he requested immediate sanctions against Angela for filing a frivolous, malicious claim. I watched Angela's face as the reality set in.
Fubin.
The mask slipped, revealing the petty, vengeful woman beneath the sophisticated facade. The judge's gaze turned cold as he read through the evidence of her manufactured crisis. You, justice, isn't always loud, sometimes it's just the sound of a gavel hitting the wood signaling that the games are over.
Few.
Valerie lost her lover. She lost her daughter's respect, and she lost the financial war she and her sister had started. I walked out of that courtroom not with hatred, but with a strange, quiet peace.
Fictions.
The truth is a stubborn thing. You can bury it under layers of lies and elaborate social media facades, but eventually it always finds a way to the surface.
Hint.
I had built my life on honesty, and while it was temporarily shaken, it was that very foundation that ultimately saved me. The lesson here is simple. Never underestimate the power of a documented life.
Every text.
Every transaction, every moment you think is privatite, leaves a trail. When you play a dangerous game, make sure you aren't the only one who knows the rules.
Thing.
And more importantly, ensure you aren't the only one keeping track of the score. Stot. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a decade, the horizon looked completely clear.
You.
I looked at my phone, seeing a message, Upia, simple and proud of us. That was all the vindication I ever needed. The chapters of the past were closed, and for once the future was entirely mine to write.
Fenton.
Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. I learned that the hard way, but am still standing, and in the end, that's all that really matters.
You dapsy.
The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's keyboard. Judge Morrison peered over his glasses, his gaze landing squarely on Angela, stood beside Nathan, my lawyer, feeling the cold weight of the past 6 months.
You.
Finally beginning to lift. Angela was trembling, her face a pale shade of gray as she tried to backtrack on the emergency motion she had filed.
You're.
It was an honest mistake, she stammered, her voice lacking the arrogance it usually carried. I've been reviewing hundreds of documents. These things happen. The judge didn't even blink.
Fix.
You filed an emergency motion, alleging fraud, counselor, the judge countered, his voice dripping with icy authority. You threw around terms like perjury and concealment.
Verify the initial disclosures before making those accusations. Dot.
Angela fell silent, the weight of her own incompetence suffocating her.
Sanctioning you.
$750 for a frivolous motion, the judge declared. Furthermore, you will cover Mr. Crawford's attorney fees for having to respond to this farce.
Siege.
My heart pounded with a slow, steady rhythm of relief. We walked out into the hallway, the sound of Angela's frantic whispering on her phone trailing behind us. Nathan smirked, adjusting his tie.
Shez rattled.
He noted quietly, and Shez going to be much more careful with her next move. The sanction order arrived 2 days later.
Thing.
It was a small victory, barely a dent in the grand scheme, but it tasted like vindication. However, Angela wasn't the type to quit. She was the type to keep digging until she hit bedrock.
He deposed.
Adam next convinced she could force a confession out of Haima narrative, where I was the puppet master, coercing Valerie into every decision. Adam didn't play her game. He sat there perfectly calm, recounting how he'd watched Valerie sign the documents, laughing and joking about my supposed paranoia. Watching Angela's face as Adam dismantled her theory was the highlight of my week.
Fusin.
She looked small, desperate, and completely out of her depth. When my turn came, the deposition lasted 6 grueling hours in Nathan's conference room.
Faye.
Angela was relentless, her questions sharp, and designed to paint me as a controlling villain. Isn't it true? You never once discussed financial matters with your wife? She grilled, leaning over the table.
Bean.
I discussed them whenever she asked. I replied evenly. She simply wasn't interested in the details. So you made all financial decisions unilaterally.
Feast.
Within the structure we both agreed to, I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. She tried to trip me up on the commingling of funds, pointing to the house mortgage payments as proof of my duplicity.
Few.
That was an oversight, I explained. The mortgage was on an auto-pay from that account. I should have separated it, but it was an honest mistake.
Famery signed.
An oversight that lasted 7 years and benefited you at my client's expense. She sneered, sensing blood in the water. An oversight that gives your client a legitimate equity claim, I added, offering a compromise.
Wrong.
Which I am willing to discuss in a settlement. The truth was, Angela's aggressive, scorched earth tactics were backfiring with the judge.
You.
She had filed 3 emergency motions in 2 months, and all 3 had been summarily denied. She had accused me of hiding assets without a shred of evidence, earning her those costly sanctions. She had tried to speed up the trial, claiming an urgent need for justice. But the judge had shut her down, leaving the case on a normal, agonizing timeline.
Figure.
She had sold Valerie a dream of a massive settlement, and now she was trapped, unable to admit that her strategy was crumbling. By the 4th month, Nathan and I sat down to talk numbers. Mingling is real, Nathan admitted, looking at the spreadsheet. A judge is going to give her something.
Fuck. Best case?
She gets reimbursed for the mortgage and improvements, about $45,000 plus her fees.
Worst case?
They find extensive commingling and award her 20% of the equity. That's an additional $77,000. I leaned back, calculating the cost of my freedom.
The retirement accounts. And the business.
Those are ironclad, Nathan assured me. No evidence of commingling there. The postnup is crystal clear.
$58,000.
For the equity claims, plus $13,000 toward her fees. She would keep her car and her personal items. I would keep everything else.
Feasier.
Angela rejected it with a laugh, telling the press and her client that they were going to trial. But she wasn't. 2 weeks later, she filed a motion to withdraw as counsel. Official reason was irreconcilable differences regarding case strategy. The reality. Valerie had run out of money. Angela had been working partially onto contingency banking on a massive payout that was never coming.
When the numbers stayed.
Modest Angela wanted out, leaving Valerie to scramble for a new lawyer. Rick, the new guy, took one look at the file and told Valerie exactly what I had offered months ago. Settle or lose everything.
3 months later, it was finally over.
Valerie walked away with $68,000 for her claims, and some of her fees covered. She kept her car and the $9,000 shed maxed out on the joint credit card. I kept the house, the business, the retirement, and my sanity. The total cost to me, just under $140,000.
Figskeet.
It wasn't the clean win I'd hoped for, but it was a hell of a lot better than the catastrophe it could have been.
By
November, Valerie's money had evaporated. She had paid off the lawyers, put a deposit on an apartment she couldn't afford, bought luxury furniture, and tried to sustain a lifestyle she hadn't earned.
Figured.
She had even given money to Troy, who ghosted her. the moment her bank account hit empty. By New Year's, she was broke again, working part-time at a real estate office.
Use Bliss.
Holding open houses for properties she would never be able to buy. Angela's reputation fared even worse. Word traveled through the family law community that she had overpromised, failed to deliver, and been sanctioned by a judge. She lost 3 clients in a single month. Even her ex-husband, the dentist shed once manipulated her back to court to modify her support payments based on her cratering income. Karma truly has a wicked sense of humor. I had spent months meticulously documenting every lie, every screenshot, and every email.
The dust settled.
I compiled it all into a folder. 60 pages of bank records and text messages detailing the entire collapse. I didn't blast it on social media. I gave it to the people who mattered.
Fetch.
Ruby, my parents and Valerie's father. Ruby already knew the truth. She had cut Valerie off months ago, but seeing the evidence in black and white hardened her resolve. She legally changed her last name to mine, severing the final dot. My parents, who had felt a shred of guilt for taking sides, finally let it go.
Proved.
There were no 2 sides to this story. Only a choice between the truth and a lie. The legal battle was finished, but the lesson remained. Some things once broken can never be repaired.
Figure.
And sometimes the best justice is simply watching the people who tried to destroy you destroy themselves instead. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, as I looked at the folder sitting on the table.
Deal.
My parents had sensed the deception long before I did, but seeing the physical proof, the documented trail of her betrayal wiped away any lingering shred of doubt or familial obligation.
Be no thent.
They had been preparing to divide the holidays between us, trying to remain neutral for the sake of appearances. After examining the contents of that folder, they made their stance clear.
Thingy.
Valerie was no longer invited to any family gatherings. Valerie's own father was shattered by the revelation, his voice trembling when he finally reached out to me.
Fingret.
I am truly sorry. I had no idea, he whispered, the weight of his daughter's choices crushing him. She is not welcome in this home until she decides to fundamentally change who she has become, he added firmly.
You want.
And then there was Angela, the architect of this chaos, who should have known exactly where the lines were drawn, so dot! Instead of offering counsel, she had actively encouraged Valerie's predatory behavior.
Thumbs.
Sudden cold isolation shattered Valley's resolve far more effectively than the bank account running dry ever could have. She had fully expected her family to stand by her to bankroll her transition into this new life.
Vegan.
However, once everyone saw the evidence, they realized she had gambled everything on a massive settlement, and she had lost. She tried desperately to piece her reputation back together, posting cryptic, vague updates on Facebook about healing and finding oneself after narcissistic abuse. But her social circle had witnessed far too much to buy into the narrative. The comments left on her posts became brutal and unflinching.
Figs up. Dot.
Maybe you should focus on fixing your relationship with your own daughter before claiming abuse, one user wrote. Fascinating how your trauma suddenly appeared right after you ran off with another man. Someone else remarked, I truly hope the affair was worth the price you paid. Read another.
Youth me.
Eventually, she deleted her social media presence, entirely retreating from the public eye. The last I heard, she was sharing a cramped apartment in Logan Square with 2 roommates.
Working full-time.
At a real estate agency, no longer just playing at open houses. Bots. She reached out to Ruby for her birthday, a desperate attempt to bridge a gap that had become a canyon.
Faint.
Ruby didn't even dignify it with a response. Angela is currently struggling to rebuild her failing practice. She is mostly handling uncontested simple divorces, now the kind where couples split assets amicably without a fight. It is a far cry from the high-stakes, ruthless litigation that once defined her reputation. Troy is still hanging around. Equinox, still shamelessly dating clients, and still uploading vapid, inspirational quotes to his Instagram stories.
Figs.
Last time I checked, he had a new wellness coaching client who looked hauntingly like Valerie did 7 years ago.
Right.
It is a tragic truth that some people are simply incapable of learning from their mistakes.
Theme.
As for me, I sold the house last year because it held too many echoes of a life that was built on a lie. I made sure to secure the equity I deserved, carefully accounting for every cent Valerie had misappropriated.
Fresh place in Lincoln Park. A new chapter written in my own ink.
Ruby graduates this May, a milestone I am incredibly proud of.
Field.
She has already accepted an offer at a Big Four accounting firm following her passion for forensic accounting. The ceremony is in May and I am flying her grandparents in from Minnesota to celebrate.
Ushindi.
My parents are driving down and we have a reservation at Alenia to celebrate the start of her future. She did not invite her mother, and I did not ask her to. Then the situation took a dark turn.
Tuesday.
Last Tuesday, Ruby called me from an unknown number, her voice sounding thin and rattled. She explained that her phone had died and she was using a friend's, but her tone was deeply unsettling.
Failed debt, Dad.
I need to tell you something, it's about Mom, she said, her breath hitching. She has been showing up at my apartment, just standing there, she continued. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white.
Fiction.
How many times has this happened? I asked, my voice dangerously low. 4 times this month, just lingering. Just watching from the street, she replied.
Feud.
The building management had claimed their hands were tied unless there was a direct threat or a physical breach. We need to file for a restraining order. Immediately, I commanded.
Eat.
I know I'm already working with Nathan. Hez drafting the petition as we speak, she said before hesitating. But Dad, there is something even worse, she whispered. Last night, she slid an envelope under my door, she added.
Exactly was inside that envelope?
I asked, feeling the temperature in the room drop. Ruby's voice turned cold and flat, a stark contrast to her earlier distress.
Fencing.
Copies of our old family photos from when I was a child and a note that said, Angela says we have options this. Isn't over, she recited.
Phenol.
I sat there in my condo, gazing out at the flickering city lights, the phone pressed firmly against my ear. Valerie was financially ruined, and Angela was a shell of a lawyer desperate for business.
No case.
And absolutely no legal path forward. The settlement had been set in stone. Everything was finalized, or so I thought. That note wasn't about the divorce settlement, it was about Ruby's trust fund. It was the inheritance her grandmother left her, the one that fully vests the moment she turns 25.
Fact.
And Valerie had just hired Angela, once again, clinging to the hope of a payday. It was truly unfortunate for them that they were playing a game they could never win.
Ushi.
Ruby's grandmother had known exactly who her daughter-in-law was right from the very beginning. That trust was protected by an independent trustee, airtight legal terms, and absolute clauses that barred parental access.
You.
Adam had helped me draft those ironclad documents 6 years ago, anticipating the day they might try this. Some people never learn, but some of us never stop preparing for the worst.
Aegis.
Guys, we are so close to hitting 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, as it really helps us reach that milestone. Thank you all for being part of this journey and helping me turn this dream into a reality.